Welcome to Cinescope Today, where our goal is to view and discuss current release films from a perspective that celebrates movies and their stories, characters, music, and relevance to the world around us, not necessarily free from criticism. I'm your host, Chad Hopkins, and joining me today, as always, is my co-host for Cinescope Today, Seth O'Neill, as well as my good friend and co-host of MuggleCast, Eric Scull.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, and we are talking about Ready Player One. Eric, you're our first guest on Cinescope Today. Congrats.
Oh, honored and thrilled, gentlemen. This is a blast, and I always enjoy my time spent with you, Chad.
Thank you. And this is you and Seth's first time meeting and talking, so Exciting things happening all around. How about you reintroduce yourself real quick before we get into the meat of our discussion? Remind everybody out there who you are, what you do, where you come from, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, I come from Pennsylvania in the U.S. I have been living in Chicago for 10 years, and I, as Chad mentioned, do a podcast called MuggleCast, which is the latest Harry Potter news, theories, and discussions. So if you have read or seen a Harry Potter book or film, and are interested in what the deep hardcore fans of that series are thinking and talking about today, look no further than that podcast, which you can find on all the usual channels. But I'm also a lifelong fan of movies. Who isn't? And I've had the great fortune of guesting on a number of episodes of the Cinescope podcast with Chad before. We go way back, it seems, and I'm looking very forward to cracking into Ready Player One, which I just saw over the weekend.
Us too. I've now seen it twice, and so I'm really champing at the bit to dive into it. But real quick, Seth and I wanted to talk about a couple movies that we've seen, but for one reason or another didn't record episodes of Cinescope Today on. So first up is Strangers Pray at Night. Real quick, Seth, what were your thoughts on that one?
I had originally seen the first one a while back. Obviously, there's a big gap between the first one and the second one to follow it up. So I really enjoyed the first one. It's actually one of my favorite scary movies because it is very realistic, which makes it even more scarier. But this second one was also good, and met a lot of expectations that the first one built up to. It's one thing that we talked about is hard to podcast about because it's just so real, and the scary movies genre is hard to kind of dive deep into. Mm-hmm. So it is enjoyable. It is real. It puts a family through a very traumatic experience, which is hard to talk about and kind of dive into because we obviously can't share in that experience at all.
Right.
But it was very enjoyable. It was scary. It met all the expectations that the first movie kind of built up to.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of the first one, too. It was the first scary movie I ever saw. We did an episode of Cinescope on it way back in episode 17 or 18 or something like that in the first year. And I was really excited for the sequel. It had been a long time, 10 years, actually. And I thought that the sequel was overall mostly pretty good. It felt like a completely different genre than the first film. The first film was a lot more reserved, whereas this one was like 80s slasher flick. And there was a score, so it wasn't as minimal, and there were 80s songs playing throughout. So in some respects, it actually had some comedic moments. But remember our screening, there were people who laughed at moments that were not appropriate to laugh at. And because those were moments when it was just really sad and depressing and heavy and gut-wrenching, and it was tough. But overall, I thought it was a fairly worthy sequel, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think for those that enjoy scary movies, they should see it. For those that are not, I mean, it's not anything that you have to go see. It's not like we're begging you to go see it, but it is enjoyable if you enjoy the scary movie genre.
Thankfully, I thought it paid homage to the original film without copying it word for word or scene for scene. So that was a nice benefit.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so there's our thoughts on The Strangers Pray at Night. Then real quick, I saw I Can Only Imagine just this weekend with my family. And I was always going to like this movie because I am a fan of Mercy Me and have been since I was in 5th grade. And so I have a really personal connection to the band and to the singer. I've seen them in concert multiple times. Now, that being said, I do think the first third of the film was pretty weak. It was pretty over the top. That was the part that featured mostly the kid actors. But something to be said, Dennis Quaid as Bart Millard's father was fantastic throughout. And the guy who played adult Bart was stellar. Knowing Bart and being familiar with him as a singer and as a personality, I thought this guy completely nailed it. And the second 2/3 of the film, for me, worked extremely well, were stellar, were very emotionally impactful, and I thought it was worth seeing. So if you're into that, it's probably the best Christian film, quote unquote, I've seen, because I don't feel like it hammered anybody over the head with anything, like some Christian films tend to do. And so I think it's worth going to see for that if you're a fan. So that's that. Let's move into what we came here to talk about, because I'm sure Eric is eager to dive in just like we are.
Sure thing.
Okay, so just real quick, going over the stats for Ready Player One. It was released just this past week, March 29th of 2018, directed by Steven Spielberg. I don't need to list his films, but I'll list just a few. Jaws, Close Encounters, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the other Indiana Jones films. E.T., Schindler's List, Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, Catch Me If You Can, Lincoln, Warhorse, The BFG, and most recently, The Post. It was written by Zach Penn on an original treatment, I think, by Ernest Cline, who wrote the book, Ready Player One. The music was by Alan Silvestri, so not Spielberg's typical Williams collaboration, and I actually think the film is the better for it. Alan Silvestri composed the scores to the original Back to the Future trilogy, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump, Contact, Serendipity, threw that one in there for you, Eric.
Thank you.
The Polar Express, Night at the Museum, Captain America the First Avenger, The Avengers Infinity War, and the upcoming untitled Infinity War sequel. The movie stars Ty Sheridan, Olivia Cook, Ben Mendelsohn, Mark Rylance, Simon Pegg, Philip Zhao, Win Morisaki, Hannah john-kamen, and T.J. Miller. So, starting off, the book. A couple of us have read it, one of us has not. So, Seth, what was your experience reading the book, and how did that frame your expectation for the movie?
Yeah, so I had no idea about this book or movie until Chad just gave it to me as a Christmas present. Like, hey, here's a book, read it. So I got the book. I was like, I'm not a huge reader. I'll see if I enjoy it at first. And literally after reading one chapter, I couldn't put it down. It was such an enjoyable read. It really gets you nostalgic just by reading what's happening in the book throughout. So I was super pumped for the movie because of the book. You could visualize by reading the book what could the movie be, and I was super excited about the expectation, especially because Spielberg's directing it, which even makes me more hyped because you know that he can do such a good job adapting that visual that Ernest Cline makes in the book into the scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I first read the book a couple of years ago. I think it might have been on the recommendation of Hybables podcast, believe it or not. I don't remember for sure what made me pick it up, but I did, and I loved it. It's worth noting that Eric, Seth, and I were not born in the 80s. And so we have...
Way to single me out.
Oh, sorry. It's the truth.
Jeez.
Man, you're so old.
Tail end of the 80s, guys. 88. I don't remember the 80s. But go on, go on.
The only reason I say that is because there's no reason we should be nostalgic for 80s culture. But here we are. And hanging in my stairwell of our apartment, we've got Raiders of the Lost Ark poster and multiple Back to the Future posters. And
well, you guys have good taste then. That's all that means.
Yes, right. And so we're nostalgic for, the book made us nostalgic for this time that we didn't even get to experience, maybe because it allows us to experience it with somebody who's obviously so passionate about it.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed the pop culture of the book and was excited to see that come to life. As Seth said, Spielberg is definitely the guy to do it, considering how much of a hand he had in forging 80s pop culture.
Right.
So very excited for the film. I avoided as many trailers as I could, just because I didn't want to see how things were or were not going to be different from the book. Now, Eric, you didn't read it, but how did sort of the hearsay of the book affect your expectation of the film?
It's so interesting. My close friends whose opinions I trust on books read Ready Player One and didn't like it. Like, absolutely did not love it. And so I had a choice in seeing this film. I knew it was Spielberg doing the 80s, and I was like, this is a can't miss, kind of situation just on that premise alone. But yeah, it was bad. I thought it was fine. I had some conversations that were sort of non-spoiler conversations about the book, but where people were like, it was a cool idea, but I have some problems with it, this, that, the other thing. So going into the movie, then, I was excited for the movie, and also I was sort of glad I didn't read it, because I didn't want to have that same experience where I both didn't like a book and then end up not liking the film. I don't know. I'm sort of torn. Coming from the Harry Potter, fandom, if a film is a bad adaptation or unfaithful literary adaptation, I never forgive it, such as Prisoner of Azkaban. I never absolutely forgive it. And from what I'm hearing, and we can definitely, I know we'll talk about this, but from what I'm hearing, there are some significant detractions from the book in the movie. And so, going into the movie, I had heard even that, and I thought, well, maybe, even if I'm the sort of person who would find a problem with the book or would agree with my friends on the book having its problems, maybe I'll love the film. So I went into it with a very, deliberately blank slate, is kind of what I'm trying to say here. It's like, well, I've heard some things. I don't know. We'll see if the movie stands on its own. So I was kind of grateful for that kind of discourse, the fact that nobody was pressuring me by saying, this is my favorite book ever, you've got to see it, or this is my favorite movie ever, you've got to see it. Just kind of, blank slate, didn't know much about it. It's one of the only times I haven't read a book before going into its adaptation. I think famously Hunger Games, I read that whole series the week before the first movie came out. Needed to do it. I didn't want to be one of those movie bandwagoners, but I think Ready Player One might make me into that. I don't know. But, yeah.
Well, the book is definitely fresher on Seth's mind than it is on mine. I don't remember a whole lot of exact story specifics, but just sort of moving into my impressions of the film, I said I'd avoided most of the trailers. I even sort of avoided rereading the book. I picked it up. I reread the prologue this past week, decided, one, I didn't have time to reread the whole thing, but two, let's let the movie be its own thing. And I'm glad I did, because after reading the book, I didn't have any problems with it. I didn't know there were people who didn't like Ready Player One until the movie started coming out. But then I saw the film, and I sort of retroactively have just a few small qualms with the book that I think that the film fixed. And that the book to me is did you get the reference, and how exact did you get it? Because without spoiling too much, there are scenes in the book where you actually go into a film, and the task was to role play as a character and get every line and gesture correct. Whereas in the film, you had more sort of psychological explorations into Halliday's character set within a pop culture world. And I actually liked that because I thought it made it more accessible. What did you think about that, Seth?
I thought that for a movie, it was the perfect choice, because I actually watched a video about this, kind of comparing the book and the movie. The book kind of goes into details that if the movie did, the movie would be 5 hours long.
Right.
Because for the levels, there's levels within levels in the book. But for the movie, they only had to do one kind of task in order to advance. So I think that it was a good choice to that. And also the levels in the book, I think the first level was watching him play Joust.
Yeah, it was like Joust, and there was something involving a location from a Dungeons and Dragons handbook or something like that in the first task of the book.
Yeah,
so comparing that to the first level of the movie, I'd rather watch a race car race than a guy playing old school retro Joust.
Yeah.
Right.
Which the race itself had the pop culture references that we craved and that we wanted from the book. So it was sort of a win-win.
See, that's so interesting, and I was planning to say this later as well. I really want already the behind the scenes kind of Spielberg's thoughts on all of it, and going into, for instance, like The Shining, like one of the second task, is it, in the movie, basically takes place inside the movie The Shining. And that kind of stuff is super fascinating to me, watching Spielberg pay homage or kind of revisit his peers, his cinematic peers, these other directors, going into their works, going into their films in such an intimate way, or in such a big way. Like, I want hours and hours of just his thoughts on that and what it meant and what he felt like doing it. But I was shocked to find that the tasks are all different in the books. I just found out at an Easter party today, and somebody else who had read the book was like, yeah, the tasks are all completely different. And I guess I understand, especially, Seth, what you're saying about timing-wise, how it would be difficult. That's often the number one excuse for not being a faithful adaptation, is timing. But it does seem like they made a concentrated effort to make a movie that was appealing to a larger audience. And I hate looking at it as like, who doesn't love a gaudy car chase? But honestly, that car chase looks really good.
That chase is so cool.
Oh, yeah.
It was awesome. I saw it in IMAX 3D, and the film, the first and only time I've seen it so far. And despite the ticket price, I was pleasantly surprised, and I loved it. So I don't know. It just seems like this is going to be one of those films, with the blessing of Ernest Cline, who, wrote a draft or a treatment for the screenplay. It seems like they had some meetings and really came to some kind of agreement over what should be changed. This isn't necessarily like the author of the book signing his rights away or life away. It seems like maybe they came to an agreement about some of this stuff. And so I'd also like to see Ernest Cline's thoughts on why something was so drastically different, because ultimately there will be people who love this movie and don't like the book. And there's going to be people who love the book and don't like this movie. And there might be people who like both or don't like both. It's just the way, the cookie crumbles. So
right.
I feel like what I want is endless discussion from the people who made it as to like what they're shooting for, because I think you got a lot of really talented people. You got Ernest Cline wrote this book that people really love, and Spielberg is a god among men for movie directors. But does it work? Does it not work in the end, either as a film on its own or an adaptation with all these changes? There had to be reasons behind each and every one of these changes. So I just hope in the end that it achieves whatever the filmmakers are going for in the end.
Right. And I already spoke to my sort of pros of the film and how it did improve over the book. If I had any issues, it was mostly in rushed character relationship building, especially in between Artemis and Parsifal at the beginning of the film. Once they sort of shoehorned that in and it was, okay, they're a thing now, I enjoyed that relationship a lot more. But the early development, getting them together and getting them interacting with each other was probably my biggest issue with the film. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot of complaints just because it was so much fun.
I think I wanted a little bit more backstory behind Finale Xandor. I guess is that Sorrento's right-hand woman. I kind of wanted more of her character. I actually expected her to be, the way the camera was lingering on her, I expected her to be Artemis. I expected her to be revealed to be Artemis at first. Just kind of going into it randomly. But I mean, it was well acted. The interesting thing too for me is I haven't seen any of Spielberg's animated works. Like I haven't seen BFG, for instance. And it was so interesting to me because I usually watch Spielberg do, straight live action, watching the camera linger on actors. This is a very familiar Spielberg, I know how that looks like. And to see so much of this film in the animated world, in the Oasis, I was kind of caught off guard because I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't feel or look the same. So it was so interesting to see him build character in using both mediums, I guess. And the film dancing between those two realities just seemed to be unique for a film. So I liked that. I like that this film really, in some key ways, isn't like any other movie that's out there. Even though it's simultaneously being exactly like, or including elements or incorporating elements from every other movie out there,
Right.
at least the '80s ones. So it's such an interesting balancing act and an interesting beast that they've created.
Seth, any cons you wanted to speak to before we dive into spoilers?
Yeah, I mean, the only con I had with the storyline was when they kind of threw in the resistance.
The idea of a resistance?
Yeah. It was very kind of like random, because if you kind of follow, because obviously I had the book knowledge to that, and in the book there's no resistance at all. So
what do you mean resistance?
whenever they
What's
kind of
going
threw
on?
the resistance in there, I was like, what?
We'll dive into that a little bit more when we get to spoiler stuff.
Yeah.
Are we talking about IOI though, or what?
No,
Like-
it's Artemis and her people.
Oh, interesting. Okay, all right,
Yeah.
So
interesting.
just basically moving on, what I'm hearing is that we all recommend people see this in theaters on the biggest screen you can, right?
Yeah, biggest, loudest screen you can. Absolutely, I would say even 3D. Spend the extra couple bucks because it looks great. Particularly in the, all the moments in the Oasis where they're floating or flying or dancing or any of that stuff, and the climactic battles and the races. They just look good in 3D.
Yeah, Seth and I did IMAX 3D, and then when I saw it again by myself last night, I saw it in AMC's Dolby Digital, which is non-3D, but it's just as big and crystal clear a screen. So I'd recommend either way, but I thought that the 3D did actually add a little bit this time. So
Yeah, typically when you go see movies, 3D is kind of like, I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
But obviously this was a great environment for it, especially because virtual reality, all that stuff.
okay, so moving on to spoiler territory, story stuff. Eric, what do you got that you liked about the story here?
Liked about the story. Okay. In general, I loved the performance of Holiday. Is it Mark Rylance?
Yeah, Mark
the
Rylance,
actor-
Spielberg's new boy toy's not the right word, but he starred in the last 3 films.
The last 3 films. Yeah, I noticed that. I looked this up just the other day. I'm like, who is this guy? Where would I have seen him? And I'm glad that it's a collaborator of like somebody that Spielberg knew he could trust, because ultimately when you have something like that, you clearly, it signals that the director has a clear vision for the character, right? And you cast the guy that you know can get the job done. So I didn't see it so much as like nepotism kind of thing,
Right.
as I did this is what. So like I think that Mark's performance, which I happen to really love and enjoy, was clearly something that a lot of thought or detail was put into by the director. So like I feel like that's Halliday's character, and it's probably different in the books, even though it's he's still the main guy with the quest. But his journey in the film as a character, as you're going into the romantic relationship, which I also understand was not a big deal at all in the book, going through this man's life, going through this man's history, his regrets, is a very personal sort of quest. And I just love sort of the mysticism, not only the fact that he's also, this wizard in the Oasis, was it Anorak, but even at the end scene where sort of we pull back the curtain and Wade meets Willy Wonka at the end of the chocolate tour, and you also have a little Halliday playing Atari or whatever. That whole mystical element of who is this guy, coupled with the real memories that were in like the museum scenes throughout the movie, portrayed a really interesting character that I absolutely wanted to know more of. I thought was sort of an intentional commentary on sort of social recluses who are, have tech startups that are worth billions of dollars, but they can't communicate with another person, So like I thought this was all pretty relevant or pretty familiar storytelling, but done in a way that was interesting, and I think the movie was kind to Halliday in a way that appealed to me.
Yeah, I think, and Seth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that ending scene from the film with Halliday is pretty much straight from the book. I mean, the sort of general takeaway, the interaction between Parzival and Halliday is the ultimate takeaway from the book too. It's all the stuff leading up to that where they're diving a little bit more into his psyche that I think was added to the film, and that's what adds to Halliday being a better character in the film than he is in the book. Because, like I said, the tasks in the book were all about pop culture references. This was some obscure thing that was hinted at in the journals that Halliday, it was the only one who knew about it. Like some obscure thing from 1982 in some dilapidated Dungeons and Dragons manual. Like it was that nitty gritty and specific in the book. Whereas here it was like, let's look at Halliday as a person. Let's look at the things that made differences in his life, the things that fueled the choices and decisions he made. And let's take a lesson out of that and make it into a task. And that's what I appreciated about the film, is that it was all about his psyche rather than I get the reference, although the references were still a part of it.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that the movie makes, obviously, the main character is Wade, but ultimately the movie is shaping around Halliday.
Mm-hmm.
It's telling us who is this creator that made this virtual reality that is now shaping that whole culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to actually learn more and more about Halliday, really, throughout the film rather than any other character. We're learning more about his biggest regrets. Obviously, his biggest success is the Oasis, but actually what happened throughout from creating the Oasis, before the Oasis, post Oasis. So who is Halliday and what and why did he do this? What was the result of it?
Mm-hmm.
And do you guys think that the end sort of summation, the epilogue of happy ending of obviously what happened, big spoiler, but even something like turning the Oasis off for Tuesdays and Thursdays so that people could spend more time in the real world with each other, did that track for you? Did that land for you? That the message, at least the film was building up toward the whole time, is that it's about our relationships with one another that make us who we are and define us and are more important than the amount of gold or any of that. How did you guys feel about that sort of message?
Here's I've heard the criticism that it doesn't sort of pay off, and I understand that, but for me, I think the film wasn't trying to choose one side or the other, the Oasis versus reality. I don't think it was telling us spend more time in the real world because the real world is real. And yeah, that was something more or less specifically said. But to me, it was about life sucks sometimes, and sometimes we do need an escape. And that's what the Oasis is there for. But reality is real. And so we do have to spend time outside to make the world a better place. And so shutting down the Oasis a couple days a week does give us the opportunity to spend more time in the world, recognize its problems, and to improve on those problems. But I think what people are missing is that the movie is also showing us the relationships that can be formed in those online virtual environments. H is Parzival's best friend. Parzival finds Artemis, or Wade finds Samantha, however you want to say it. These are real relationships that are formed within this virtual environment, and those are no less than the ones that are formed person to person. And so I think the film is towing the line and saying, yes, balance needs to happen, but one isn't necessarily better than the other. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah. I think the key word to use there that I was actually going to use is balance. Like, it needs to be a balance. One cannot favor the other because you need both. In this situation, you need both to be, what's the word I'm looking for? To operate in this new world, because that virtual reality had already made such a big impact at that time. It was the culture, but it's also important to realize that virtual reality is itself a virtual reality. There is a reality that you have to know, that you have to be a part of right now as well.
We're really like living in the world from WALL-E, right? Like
Yeah.
like Earth or human society from WALL-E. Everybody's plugged in. Nobody's really paying much attention. And like the longer you stare at the real world scenes in this movie, the more horrified you are. I mean, you've got this huge mega corporation that's basically the number one opposition, right? And the bad guys, and they're pretty scary. They torture their employees and seem to have like a form of
indentured servitude.
Indentured. Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. On regular citizens, and they are absolutely abusing the power and privilege that they have, and it's this huge corporate capitalist BS. That's huge. That's a problem. Also, like, the world's in disrepair and everything's dirty and messy, and Wade's own personal life is horrifying. So there's issues of domestic abuse and poverty, and everybody's being kept real poor, and it's just not a situation that is desirable at all. And the Oasis is presented very much as an escape from that, which I get. But it's almost to the point where it's way overkill. The only thing that they're not spending money on, a cleaner home. They're spending money on a better VR suit that's going to make them feel when they get kicked in the balls. So it just absolutely is everybody's priorities off. I think part of this film is almost cautionary because it worries me that I spend too much time playing video games.
Well, yeah, I agree. But then I look at the final battle on Planet Doom, and you see the 4 Ninja Turtles, and we cut to the real world, and we see these kids who are living out their fantasies of being Ninja Turtles together. And then you see the Halo clan. And then I think to my time spent playing Destiny, I've got a clan of people who I've never met in real life, but I consider some of them to be very good friends. And I could only imagine going into a fight like that with my fire team from Destiny and kicking some IOI butt. I mean, I and those are real relationships. I don't doubt those friendships any more than I doubt this friendship I have with Seth, who's sitting in the room with me. And so I see both sides of it. And I think that the film is trying to toe the line there, saying that, yes, both can be good, but yes, you need to have both.
Well, in a way, that's also like what you mentioned about the friends and the clan banding together and being themselves while supporting each other. That's what Spielberg films have always been about.
Right.
Like almost to the letter. Like even I'm thinking of The Goonies, which was not directed by Spielberg, but he wrote the story for it. Like these films that showcase individuals using their own unique talents to be more than a sum of their parts when they're brought together is absolutely 100% Spielberg's like fingerprint. Seeing it in this film, as well as the appeal when Parzival has his speech at the end and is really appealing to the world. They don't know him. I mean, I guess it helps that he has some notoriety, but he's able to appeal to their humanity to get them to all show up and risk, very real being cashed out threat to bring down the enemy. And I think it's very humanist and it's very heartwarming in that way. And so I absolutely I do eat up a good story that's like the common decency and people finding it or re-finding it after a period of, I don't know, away time or distraction.
Going back to story details, like or specifically the visuals of the film, we talked a little bit about them, but the animation in this movie is so fantastic, and it looks great on the big screen. Our first glimpse into the Oasis as we fly through Minecraft World, I laughed out loud, and then we see Vacation World and the Casino Planet, and then later we're going through the artifacts store, or whatever you want to call it, trading zone, where you see artifacts from Borderlands, which is a loot-based shooter game. You see characters from Halo, or you see the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I felt so fully absorbed into the film and just appreciated all the pop culture that it was bringing to me. Because yes, it was about stuff I recognized and that I had a more intimate relationship with, but also it was like, hey, I know that name. I don't know much about it. It's cool to see it in the film alongside the things that I'm comfortable with.
Seth, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the animation itself is I think that adds a personal touch to the people that are watching it, because obviously it has nostalgic 80s references, but also has 2000s references, 2010s references. So no matter what age you are, you can connect with something that is on the screen. And I think that is very strong because when you connect with something on the screen, it makes you more connected to the film itself because you want to know more about, well, I know this character. Why is he in there?
And that was another advantage of the film, is that it brought the references to today, whereas the book was very much rooted in the 80s. And I think it was smart of Spielberg to make it a celebration of all pop culture with the focus on 80s, rather than the book just being exclusively 80s. And if you don't know it, you're sort of just left behind.
Yeah, I expected going into it, again, not having read the book, but hearing things about how 80s it was, I expected 1,000 more Pac-Man time, I expected a bunch more Pac-Man, a bunch more Rock'em Sock'em robots, none of that stuff. I almost expected kind of Wreck-It Ralph, but I also have not seen Wreck-It Ralph. Which that's on me.
Yeah.
Take Chad just made the most ugliest face right now. You have no idea.
But I mean, well, does this film compare at all to Wreck-It Ralph? Like, what would you say? How would you say these films are similar and different? Just going on a tangent there first.
Well, Wreck-It Ralph isn't about the pop culture references. The pop culture references are just sort of in the background for you to enjoy. They're not as integrated into the story as they are here. But in Wreck-It Ralph,
really?
Yeah, as in Wreck-It Ralph, you do have like Tappers, you have Cubert, you have a Sonic the Hedgehog appearance. I don't remember Dig Dug, but there are those references to popular arcade culture and appearances by significant characters from then and today, but it's not as central to the story itself. The story of Wreck-It Ralph is very much just about Ralph trying to find his place as the bad guy of his video game. Whereas here in Ready Player One, it's about diving into what Halliday enjoyed and using that to find out more about himself. They were more primary here than they were secondary in Wreck-It Ralph.
Okay, that's fair. I will say I lost my mind twice watching this movie, Ready Player One, and the first was during the first task in the race. They're going through town and there's a movie theater, and on the marquee it says Jack Slater, or Jack Slater 4. That is a reference to Last Action Hero, the 1993 film. Directed by John McTiernan with Arnold Schwarzenegger and F. Murray Abraham, where a kid gets sucked into a movie and has to help that action star named Jack Slater survive. So it was absolutely like the tiniest little, the car is just rounding the corner, and on the marquee it says either Jack Slater 4, which is what the movie was inside the other movie, or just Jack Slater. I lost it. I just couldn't, you can't prepare yourself for like how you're going to feel when something like that, something so mundane, like reaches out of like a corner of a frame and speaks to you. Like I couldn't believe it. Like it just I was paralyzed with glee for some reason. It's a great movie. Everybody should see Last Action Hero. But then the other time was just seeing the listening to the score and seeing the DeLorean on screen.
Right.
Every minute of the entire film, every time it was on screen, I was just a little bit dead. So I will say, like, succumbing to the like the flashiness of the nostalgia is, I feel like it's not why I loved the film, but I feel like there's a lot to love in that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
I don't know.
For me, as far as blow my mind moments go, during that first race, the T-Rex all of a sudden popping up and delivering that classic roar after swallowing a car or two. I think that's like the one specific reference to a Spielberg directed film in this one, because I think he tried to take out most of his own references so as not to be accused of
praising himself.
Yeah, self-celebrating. But the Back to the Future he produced, so he did bring that in. But then the other one was the Shining scene. I had heard no inkling of that before I saw this, and I lost my mind. I was so excited. I was theorizing while we were watching out loud, almost, maybe even a couple of times. Room 237. And I love The Shining. Like, it is my favorite scary movie. And to the moment I realized that they were about to go inside of it was one of the coolest movie going experiences I've ever had. And then going through with H, who has never experienced The Shining, and following the twin girls, and then the blood coming through the hallway, and then falling into 237, and then falling into the maze, and we see the silhouette of Jack as he's chasing after him with the axe. It is so cool. That is mind-blowing to me that they were able to recreate that film within this film. And it was just, I can't imagine that movie going, that specific experience, that specific moment being topped even this year, really.
And I mean, it's Spielberg doing Kubrick.
Right.
It's absolutely, I mean, never mind the scenes that are lifted directly from the film and then the characters are superimposed, like going into the hotel, I guess, when they first go in. But kind of for for those very few scenes, it's Spielberg mimicking another director's style in a way, you know, in a way that's, again, extremely intimate, or maybe homage is the right or wrong word, but like, you got to think about that stuff when you're doing that. And you know, I'd love to just read an article on how those scenes are, you know, a tribute or similar or not similar, or maybe just Spielberg's just being Spielberg, but the attention to detail, they really nailed it. And I think that is not just, it's not derivative at all. It's craftsmanship of like the highest art to be able to recreate and recontextualize some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's very awesome. And like you said, kind of prior to before we get spoilers, that it'd be really cool to have a good interview of them answering a lot of questions of differences between the book and the movie. Because in the book, there was really no reference to The Shining at all. The Shining is a brand new thing that they threw into the movie. Because in the book, the movie that they had to dive into and act and say all the lines was War Games. So
with Matthew Broderick.
Yeah, with Matthew Broderick, yeah. So they had to dive.
I don't even remember that movie.
Yeah, they had to dive into the character Matthew Broderick and do every single line in action Matthew Broderick does in that movie. So Shining was just a new idea. So I'm curious as to like why they chose The Shining. Obviously, it's a huge movie that the 80s were all around. It was a huge, scary movie. So it was one that I'm sure that wasn't hard to choose from. But it was just very interesting that it chose it. And one other reference that I really enjoyed was they had the holy hand grenade.
Oh, the holy hand grenade.
I saw that and I was just like, yes. It was a count to three.
Yeah, count to three.
Count to three and throw.
I mean, all the Back to the Future references. You know, Eric and I, that's sort of our thing is Back to the Future. And
yeah.
I mean, you have the DeLorean, you have the Goldie Wilson poster, you have the Zemeckis cube, you have all the references within the score. There was one moment during the race where I turned to Seth and I say, "That's the percussion from Back to the Future with different melodic material on top."
Yes. Instead of going down, it goes up, and instead of going up, it goes down. Otherwise, it's exactly Back to the Future. And you know what? Like, I tweeted after I saw the movie, I wonder how much money Alan Silvestri got paid to rip himself off. This is absolute. It is. I guarantee you, they're so recognizable yet opposite, like transposed up instead of down themes that are so much Back to the Future. This is like the essential fourth Back to the Future film as far as the score is concerned. And like the score does tons of other stuff, but for long extended sequences of action, I think all the big sequences, it's Back to the Future. It absolutely is like something from one of the Back to the Future movies is playing intentionally.
Right.
It's crazy.
One last thing story-wise before we dive into characters, I think. I like how in the more pivotal scenes, Spielberg cut back and forth between reality and Oasis to show the contrast of the two. The wonder and imagination of the Oasis versus the dystopian, tough reality of the world. And seeing people as they imagine themselves versus how they appear in real life. I think that was a really fascinating contrast, and he does it more as the film goes on, as the characters learn balance. Like that's sort of the takeaway of the film. And when Wade is giving his speech in the back of the van to everybody on Planet Doom, we see more of Wade giving that speech than we do Parzival, even though Parzival is the one being broadcast. There's lots of close-ups of Wade walking around the trailer with his gear on because it's more... He's learned at that point in the film that it's not winning the prize isn't about getting cool stuff for himself and buying a mansion, as he alludes to earlier in the film. It's about saving the world, stopping IOI, making the Oasis accessible and available to everybody, and still promoting that the Oasis has real world consequences. And so I thought that was a really smart move by Spielberg to cut back and forth, especially in those more pivotal moments.
Yeah, without that, you would kind of forget that there are real people controlling these characters
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
I think that's super. If you spend, then there's a lot of this movie spent in the Oasis.
Yeah.
It's probably close to like 60-30 or something, but which is not a lot of real world stuff. But in those crucial scenes, I think it is very well balanced, and you do understand ultimately that there are real people controlling this. So I was impressed by that balance, I think, as well.
Yeah, and also shows the personal attachment that the real world people have to their avatars, to their characters in the virtual reality. I think that's really powerful that most of the speech was Wade, because you can see the emotion that he has towards what he feels towards the Oasis, what he actually feels towards IOI. So you're actually seeing the real person showing his real emotions portrayed through Parzival.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, story-wise, I don't know that they needed to blow up his aunt and have him, need to try and get a hold of her, and the, domestic situation be an issue right before they bombed, okay, IOI is very evil, they just killed his aunt. They were presumably responsible for the death of his parents, maybe, originally, or at least Samantha's, parents as well, it was kind of, this movie does sort of suffer from being streamlined, I think, a little bit in certain areas like that. It stood out as on the nose, or when Artemis and Wade or when Samantha and Wade are courting, that was pretty rushed, I thought. There's some interesting ideas, for instance, and as we get into the characters, we can talk more about it, but Samantha says to Wade, or Artemis says to Parzival, you only see what I want you to see. You don't know me. You only know what I want you to know, and you only see what I want you to see. That's huge. That right there is the line for anonymity on the internet dating back to the 90s, the early 90s. Right? You aren't, you can be truly anonymous, and you can hide more about yourself when you're not in front of another person. And that almost should have been more of a thesis statement, but in the end it was just boiled down to sort of a character being anxious to meet this boy. So I don't ultimately know that the romantic subplot, for instance, was necessary in the story, even if it's what happens in the book. I was far more interested in other aspects than the romance between Parzival and Artemis. And at the end, can I just say, the scene where Og or whoever, or it's either the police or Og, are come up to the door to give him everything, and Wade and Samantha are I don't know, she's helping him out of his suit or something, and then they have to close the door. They open the door, and she's helping him out of his suit, and they're I'll let you go. Then he closes the door, and then they open it back up, and they're in a different position. I didn't think that was necessary at all. But I don't know. It's just, that's the kind of stuff where it gets into popcorny, goofy kind of romantic. I don't know that really was brought to its full use or potential.
They definitely did play up the romance from the book. In the book, from what I remember, it was very sort of one way from Wade to Artemis for most of it. In fact, I don't think they met until after Parzival had won, in face to face. No, well, it was towards the end.
It was before the final challenge, because Og in the book, Og gets all the high five and brings him to his mansion, and they play. And the final challenge is mansion.
Yeah, so that's played off just a little bit differently, but rather than them meeting face to face halfway through the film, it's more in the last quarter of the book. And
the one thing I kind of talked about in the beginning of the podcast that I didn't like was kind of the way they first met was through the resistance, is what the movie brought into it, and that was an idea that is new to the movie. But it was weird because I don't know how they never explained how they found Wade in the movie. All of a sudden they had that dude kind of trace him. How did they know he was in the trailer park? How did they pick him up? That was the only question I had. That was they didn't really fill that hole in the story for me.
For me, it's like if IOI can find him based on like tracking a shipment of like that power suit or whatever to him, I felt like anybody could. Like that information is like purchase history. I just get that it's hackable on the internet. I don't need that necessarily spelled out for me. But the big thing about the Resistance I have is, were they even useful in the film? Other than tracking Wade down, what do they even do? Like, these are people who have a vested interest in toppling IOI. Do we see them again? Because the Resistance is the planet. The Resistance is everybody else who digitally shows up to kick butt on Planet Doom, right? There's no longer a need for an army that's in, like, conveniently in Columbus, Ohio, because these 5 friends are running around in a van and they're the Resistance. Like, there almost doesn't need to be this added complication of, you know, Samantha's people, and are they all just killed when IOI shows up, or what exactly, you know, is the situation? So I would agree that if it's an addition that isn't in the books, I don't think it's clear at all what purpose it serves, and I don't know why it exists.
Yeah, it's not super useful. I mean, when we first meet Artemis in the film, she's referred to as a Sixer Fixer. So we just have a sense that she is on some sort of vendetta against the Sixers and IOI, and just having her be a part of some, quote, resistance in the real world, however brief they were involved in the story of the film, was just their way of reiterating that. But yeah, we probably could have done without that specific detail. Now, just speaking more towards Wade and Parzival, I like that we see the difference between him as Wade and him as Parzival. When he's in the Oasis, he's self-confident. He struts along. He's able to talk to anyone without stuttering. But then when we first meet him as Wade and he returns to the stacks with his aunt and her boyfriend, he cowers, he stammers, he's unsure of himself. It's a growth throughout the film as he brings the parts of himself that he developed in the Oasis, the parts of him that were Parzival and helped him to be more sure of himself, when he brings that into the real world. In those instances where he talks with and later kissing Samantha, or in the chase sequence in the real world at the end when Finale shows up and he jump kicks her in real life, yes, with the help of the rig, but he has that self-confidence to do something that previously you'd pretty much only do in the Oasis and bring it to the real world, because the two are melding. There's not so much a difference between Wade and Parzival. And in fact, when him and Samantha meet for the first time, he says, well, you can call me what you want. They're all the same to me. And at that point, they really are.
Yeah, that's really interesting to point out his character growth. I like that a lot.
And we also see his growth from branching out from within himself. At the start, he says, you know, the quest, if I get the egg, I'm going to buy a mansion. I'm going to buy all this cool stuff. I'm going to buy a new suit.
Oh, yeah.
And he's so unwilling to team up with anyone, even with H. He's not in a clan together. They're just friends. And so he's tackling the complications of chasing the egg solo and sharing tidbits here and there. But by the end, he's with his friends both in the Oasis and in the real world as the High Five.
Kind of convenient. They were all living in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, that's true.
Huh? Very, very sort of convenient. I don't know.
Maybe it's just a small world sort of situation, you know.
Yeah.
What are the odds?
Yeah, I don't
But
know.
they bring that relationship from the game into real life and forge real friendships and become a clan together. And he realizes that the events within the Oasis have those real world consequences that need to be dealt with when he does win. And that sort of forms his opinions and the decisions he makes as head of the Oasis, and bringing on Og as a consultant for decisions made in the Oasis. And so I like seeing that he made it from about himself to about everybody else.
Yeah, I think the contest itself opened Parzival's eyes. Because whenever you first get the contest, obviously it's like the lottery. Like,
Right.
obviously that's how it kind of relates to today. Like, obviously when you want to go buy the lottery, you think, I want a lot of money. You when for the contest, I want all the money. I want to own this corporation. That'd be pretty cool. I'd use a lot of money for myself. But as he learned more about why the Oasis was made, and also what are the problems that the Oasis has right now, obviously he sees IOI being the problem. So his eyes are more open, deeper and deeper. He gets into this contest, and obviously Artemis has a hand in that because she kind of opens his eyes, helps him understand the evil in the Oasis and in the real world. But he kind of has a purpose that is just molded and changed throughout the movie. And at the end, he finally, whenever he gives the big speech, I feel like that's like the climax. He finally understands what he needs to do with the Oasis.
Mm-hmm. A real quick side note, the line that made me laugh hardest, possibly both times I saw the film, was during Halliday's death monologue at the start when he says, my fortune is estimated at $500,000, $500 billion. And he corrects himself from, I don't know, that maybe it's a silly thing to laugh at, but that got a huge laugh from me both times.
I did lose it. I did lose it with the Star Trek
yeah, that too.
funeral thing. Where he's, all the Star Trek in that decked out. I was like, yes!
Now, what are our thoughts on Samantha and Artemis? We already talked a little bit about her weaknesses, but what do we like about her?
Yeah, as a character, she's really driven, and I like that about her. She's extremely confident. She's extremely competent. Apparently, there was something in there about he's watched all her web videos, was it playthrough vids or whatever that she's posting. So like, I kind of want to see more of that. You know, it seems like she has sort of a side hustle where she helps people play different games around the Oasis. So, you know, would have benefited from, you know, some more screen time to see what her life was like before she was a resistance fighter. Even though she's been one all her life, how she's kind of what she's done to more camouflage herself, because from the get-go, and this is a failing of it being a movie, is you're introduced to like the 5 or 6 main characters almost immediately, you know, H and H's couple friends, and then Artemis and Parzival. I would have liked to have seen more time devoted to how she is good at hiding and camouflaging. We of course see her do that in this film. She's able to get the magic shield down in a really clever and creative way, and I think that's definitely her strong point, is her resourcefulness. She does need to and is fine with relying on her friends when she's in trouble, which is great. Like, she's just not, I don't think there's anything to dislike necessarily. She is, a good friend, a solid warrior, a solid fighter, and, you know, very intelligent. And you know what? She lets Parzival in a, like, I think is a really natural or special way. Like, she kind of has an intuition about him or something, and then that sparks, like, her judge of his character is what ultimately leads to the resolution of the movie, is because she takes sort of a chance on this guy.
Yeah, I think that the change kind of that we see in Artemis, I think that actually she starts off being a loner with her mission, because obviously she is personally impacted by IOI because of her parents, and you kind of see that whenever she's going through the first race where her motorcycle's destroyed. He just says, "Hey, I'll fix your bike." When it's fixed, she kind of gets out of there. And I think she didn't really understand Wade because he was naive, because his first thing was like, "What would you do with that prize?" "Oh, I'd buy all the money." She kind of brushes him off like, "Oh, he's just another one of those normal people that just wants the money." So I think she obviously her perspective changes because she then kind of opens up to Wade as she knows him more, opens up to H, opens up to Shaito and Daito. Is it Shadow and Daito?
It's Daito, and they just call him Sho.
Sho, that's right. I was one of them. But she opens up to that because she sees that she is not the only one that has an issue with IOI. There are plenty that are having issues with it, and that they themselves, like, kind of, like I said, they are the resistance.
Right. I don't have a whole lot to add. I appreciated her go-getter personality and her willingness to put herself at risk. And she does that from the start. She, right after that, the first race, when Wade does save her from dying, she sort of chastises Wade for that. She says, well, our only concern shouldn't be losing our stuff. It's about the world losing its stuff. And she said, if I don't take that chance of trying to get past King Kong or whatever the situation may be, then IOI wins and everybody else loses. And so for her, it's always about sacrificing herself for the betterment of everybody else. And yeah, we see her do that multiple times, whether it's in the race or whether it's taking that initial leap in the gold room of the Overlook or sneaking around IOI headquarters to infiltrate the Shield and to fight against the Sixers from within. She does a lot of cool stuff that put herself at risk, but it's all because she has a bigger picture in mind.
You know, I'm surprised we made it this far in the podcast without talking about Sorrento.
Yes, he was definitely up next on my list. Let's let you lead it off.
I mean, he's the villain, right? He's this guy. He at first appears to be nothing more than a corrupt, power-hungry bureaucrat or someone who doesn't have a lot of power. I mean, he rose essentially from being a coffee clerk, wannabe, who didn't have the talents of somebody like Halliday. He looked up to and idolized, to now somebody who's going to subvert that person's wishes and do like whatever it takes to control or grasp for power that he was never smart enough to have. It's a very common and understandable sort of motivation for a villain. That said, I think that his portrayal by Ben Mendelsohn had like a lot of nuance to it. You really hate this guy for a lot of reasons, but all of it has to do with, I think, his character. Like the weak spots really come through in like his lack of confidence, and I don't know. He's kind of a character that you love to hate because of his portrayal is kind of, I don't want to say like aloof, but I mean, it's just such a laugh in the audience that I was in. It's such a laugh when you see that this guy is somebody who puts his password, to remind himself on the inside of his gaming chair. And like, even what that password is, Bossman69, like, oh, this guy is clearly just such a prick. Like this is, so I think the movie builds his character well by using all the elements that are, all the tools that are available, all the storytelling tools to showcase what an ass this guy is are utilized in a really creative and compelling way, and the actor runs with what he's got. There's very meaty scenes where he's facing off against Parzival or Wade, and I guess the question I have for you guys is whether or not you found the character Sorrento to be terrifying, because in the end, he really does wield a lot of power, and in the end, meaning the end of the film, he could still kill Wade. Like, I'm not sure quite what to make of the end reveal where he's sort of, I don't know if he comes to sort of some kind of, if his personal conflict leads out, why he doesn't shoot Wade, but he wields real power in this movie. So were you guys satisfied with him as like a villain? Did you feel he was compelling enough, or just sort of goofy and didn't really?
I think he was goofy, but the one thing that made me completely understand that he was the villain was he was desperate. Like, the one thing that you see is whenever he has the first meeting with Sorrento, that Sorrento has people above him that control the company and can also control his fate. So if his mission does not go well, his life is on the line. So anyone that has that desperation is dangerous. So
when was that illustrated?
It was during the board meeting when he was assuming that they were going to win no matter what, and he was demonstrating we can sell up to 80% of a person's visual space before inducing seizures, and so he was at the mercy of the board, who didn't have the complete faith that Sorrento was going to be able to pull off this victory.
Huh. You almost need like a Darth Vader character. Like, I will say on that front exactly, when he first met Irok, when he goes to meet Irok, I thought Irok, this dude who has like a skeleton or a skull carved out of his chest, I thought that was going to be his boss. I was shocked. Like, generally, you're on a volcano planet, and there's this terrifying. I fully expected that to be, and not just because the same actor played Krennic in Rogue One and literally had to answer to Darth Vader, but I absolutely was expecting there to be sort of a sinister presence higher up. But besides that one scene with the board of directors who seem to have control, Sorrento operates with almost full autonomy. I mean, he authorizes the raids, he authorizes the bombs that kill Wade's aunt and her boyfriend. It's shocking kind of how much he is doing. And at the very end, like, he gets into a car and kicks a guard out and then asks the guard for his gun. He has such power with that company. I mean, he's just a businessman. What's this guy doing, being authorized to ask a security guard for their gun and having that security guard give it to him? So, like, this guy, there's so much more to this character that, like, isn't fully explained. Apparently he's combat trained or something. I don't know, but it's just... the way he handles that massive robot as well, he's clearly had some tactical combat training, I guess is what I want to say. So he's also he's a soldier essentially.
What I really liked about Sorrento is the sort of inner message about how greed without work doesn't yield results. He thinks he deserves the prize, but is unwilling to do the research that might give him the advantage. He relies instead on this sort of task force he has behind the scenes doing all the Halliday research for him. And so he has no knowledge at hand without the other people in his ear that would help him to win this search, this Easter egg hunt. And he also is an example of damaged pride and how that fuels his anger. When Finale first offers him the gun, saying, "Do you think you can do my job better? Here's a gun, go do it." And he balks at it. He doesn't want to go kill Wade and kill the others. But later, after Parzival has survived the Cataclysm, thanks to the extra life token, he climbs in the vehicle and he says, "You know what? Give me that gun because I am ready at this point. Things have gone badly enough. My pride has been damaged. I was kicked in the balls just a few minutes ago. I'm ready to kill this kid." And you mentioned something, Eric, that I wanted to ask. What is it that stays his hand when he finally reaches Wade with the gun? Is it because he sees that Wade has already won and received the egg? Does that stop him? Or does he have a sort of change of heart when seeing Wade's awe at this prize and his tears at that point too? Like, what is it that causes Sorrento to not shoot Wade? Do you have an idea, Seth?
I would go with the way that he sees he's already lost. I feel like he just is like, well, he kind of stands there as like, well, crap. I lost. My job is now failed. I have nothing now. So I feel like he's kind of standing in, not really in awe, but stand in just depression. He is done. His mission's failed. That's my take.
Well, I wonder, this is something that sort of just occurred to me, but what if this whole time he was after the money and the power of it all, right? Whereas all the other Gunters, they were after... some of them after the money, but a lot of them after the exploration of the pop culture and the exploration of Halliday as a person, because Halliday was this guy who created this space for them to be whatever and whoever they wanted to be. And so their search for the Easter egg was largely fueled by their awe of the man who created it. And
yeah, they're on a spiritual hunt. They're on a spiritual mission to meet God, basically.
And so I wonder there at the end if Sorrento, seeing Wade holding the egg with his gloves glowing gold and the tear running down his face, finally gets it. Because we almost see a twitch of a smile too. Right. We notice. I don't know. That's just something that maybe just now occurred to me, was that it was something he didn't understand, but now he gets it, and so he's not going to follow through with what he intended to initially.
For me, it's the movies need to have a happy ending is the only thing that prevents Sorrento from shooting Wade in the freaking face. Because he's the kind of character who you get the idea would be a bit vindictive. After all he's been through in that film and all that he does. But it's just such a weird scene because, to be perfectly honest, ever since he shows up at the stacks with the gun and the crowd confronts him and that woman says, "We know what you've done. You better get in your car and turn back." They mob him, they surround him, but they don't mob him. He has a gun, and all of a sudden, all the threats are moot. He is able to approach the trailer, open up the back door, and aim the gun at Wade's face. And, like, I get it, sort of. It's a gun, it's terrifying, but there are hundreds of people there surrounding Sorrento, and they could have, somebody could have come from behind. And anyone who's combat trained, which, by the way, all of these people live their lives playing like Call of Duty in the real world, so you probably have at least some semblance of how to wrap your arms around somebody's head from behind to get like a gun out, like put them in an arm lock kind of thing to like break. I thought about this way too much in the scene as it was happening, but he's not even pointing it at anybody when he's wading through these people. So because it's up in the air, right? But he's moving forward as if he's not going to shoot or something. Somebody should have just disarmed him, given a few kicks to the ribs, and that would have been it. Instead, he gets way too close for comfort. Absolutely way too close for comfort. So the movie failed really to illustrate for me why it is that he stops. Maybe it's shooting for an open-ended kind of vague insert your own, choose your own adventure, choose your own example thing. What I'd like to believe it is that, yes, from day one of serving coffee to Halliday, he never quite understood what was special about the Oasis or what was special about the invention or what was special about, the art or the craft until seeing, like, that it was over and maybe Wade's reaction caused him to finally understand some key piece of the Halliday mystery. I'd like to believe that was, probably what it was. But Sorrento, I think realistically, if you're going off of the rest of the film, it seemed the last 20 minutes of his character arc seemed very weird, extremely rushed, and didn't make a lot of sense. Like, I now hate everybody else in the stacks for not just tackling him. And I shouldn't. Like, the movie shouldn't have. I think that's a stupid scene, honestly. I think it's very weird. So I like his character a whole heck of a lot in the film, but the end is not too clear.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I do think that's a weakness. I do think he would have been pretty easily disarmed, maybe at the additional loss of somebody else, and maybe that's what they were trying to prevent, was one or two people being caught in the crossfire as they took him down. But still...
But they're leading him to their god. Like, they're leading him to the man who's literally like he's going to win this world. His implications are sky high, and you're going to allow this guy with a gun to get anywhere near him, especially when he's from your neighborhood and your neighborhood was just bombed by this dude. Like, right? Yeah, absolutely not. Like, not. Under
I don't
any
disagree with you, Eric. It's just that's what happened, and we got what we got.
Yeah. I know.
No, you're okay.
Sorry
if
I'm coming on too strong about that.
We already talked a little bit about Halliday and Anorak. No character-specific things I think I have to add, but I just want to say I like Mark Rylance a lot. As Anorak, he actually reminds me a lot of his performance as the BFG. Some of the vocal mannerisms and the facial expressions in the best of ways. I really appreciated that. And I'm excited to see more from Rylance. He's already won one Academy Award with Spielberg for Bridge of Spies. I'm excited to see what future collaborations they have together, if they are all as stellar as their three efforts together so far. So...
For me, Halliday and Og and the relationship between them, which we've talked about before as being the heart of this movie, really works. Really just works for me. And when Wade is able to theorize in front of Og what Halliday really wanted in life and that he regretted, losing his best friend or his only friend, things like that. Og's response. I mean, Simon Pegg's performance in this film is superb in my mind, and it rivals Mark Rylance's. I just thought you buy it. You absolutely buy that these people, went separate ways but liked each other. You buy it as, I think, a friendship that was like professionally strained. And then there's that whole thing about wanting to marry his wife. But I think it absolutely was complicated in a way that I think reality actually is often complicated like that. So I liked that was reminiscent of something pretty much more or less that you'd find in
Seth,
the
the
headlines.
curator wasn't a character in the book, was he?
No, the curator was not a character. Og did have a character in the
Right.
book. It
Yeah.
was not the curator though.
Yeah, he had like special powers within the Oasis in the book, but he was actually Og, or his character, his avatar within the Oasis. That was maybe one small thing from the ending. If I had to pick at it, it would be, there's no way he was the curator 24/7. You know.
Oh yeah, because people are constantly.
But it's a fun
searching
detail.
You're right.
I don't care that much. It was just like, I'll let that slide because he gave him the quarter. But still, anyways, we're running long, so let's move on just a little bit. We already talked a little bit about the music. I just wanted to say, as much as I love John Williams and was maybe slightly initially disappointed that Williams had to pass because of the post, I think that Silvestri in the end was actually the sort of the proper choice for scoring this film, especially if Spielberg was going to take all the extra effort to not reference himself. Alan Silvestri was sort of like secondary in forming the sound of the 80s with music for Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit and whatever else he created then. And like you said, Eric, it's basically a companion score to the Back to the Future trilogy. It's the same instrumentation. There's specific motifs that were from the Back to the Future score that reappeared here. We already mentioned the percussion during the race that's borrowed from the clock tower. There's the vehicle collisions at the end that borrowed from Doc checking his watches. Then the flute and piccolo solos that sort of represented Wade at the beginning and at the end were very similar to solos from the Back to the Future trilogy. So I love that it was Silvestri just because he was able to borrow so heavily from a score that I already love so much while still creating an earworm of a melody and a lot of other incidental music that I think worked really well for the film.
Yeah, and I think it all goes back to just the familiarity and making you feel comfortable with the nostalgia of it. And obviously, not everyone's going to connect with the music because not everyone is so heavy of a Back to the Future fan, so they may not recognize it. But I think it still has that sound that makes it nostalgic and makes it connect with the movie even more. So it has that power with it.
Mm-hmm. While we're on the subject of Back to the Future references, this was something that I saw on Twitter the other day that completely made sense to me and sort of blew my mind. Ty Sheridan, well, you know, they drive the DeLorean in reverse in this film. And originally Spielberg was going to have him check out the rearview mirror. But Ty Sheridan, having experience in an actual DeLorean, because Ernest Cline, the author, has a DeLorean and let Ty around in it, there's a flux capacitor in the way of the rearview mirror. So you can't check the rearview mirror. So it was Ty's idea to Spielberg to say, hey, we need to raise up the gull-wing doors and have him looking behind him through the gull-wing doors because that's the only way he'd be able to see behind him. So that's a small little detail that I thought was fantastic. And then driving around in the final fight sequence with Parzival and Artemis in each of the seats with the wing doors open again, firing weapons out. It's just a small attention to detail that I really appreciated because there is a flux capacitor there. You can't use the rearview mirror. Now, relevance, we already talked about a couple of our big takeaways. Does anybody have anything else to contribute as far as that goes? I have a couple.
Yeah.
Okay. There was the smaller one about how it's not about winning or losing. It's about playing the game. Just the adventure of it. Ooh. And at the end, Halliday thanks Parzival before he leaves. He says, thank you for playing my game. Not thank you for taking the extra effort to win. It's thank you for playing. And I think that's, I follow a couple of game developers from Bungie on Twitter, and there were one or two people who said, you know, I really appreciated the sort of stance that the film took at game development and gaming culture, because they do just want people to play and enjoy their game. They don't want it to be picked apart necessarily or play for the sole purpose of winning. It's about having fun. And so I think that was a smaller but still important message that the film champions.
I think you could probably eviscerate Halliday for that stance, though. given that there's such stark power dynamics going on in the world. Like, many people are poor, probably a higher population than percentage than what we're seeing in the real world today, and that real power is held in fewer hands, and if this is if the biggest leading competitor company is having an indentured servitude thing going on with real citizens of the world, it's kind of very lofty for Halliday to be like, thanks for playing. They had no choice. Like, the only way they're going to get out of their crap hole town and save, create a better living situation, not only for themselves or for the world, is by divesting your company and sharing it with others, multiple people. So I think there is sort of a problem there if you think too much into Halliday as a character. But I think that for me, the ambiguity of who and what that version of Halliday that Parzival sees is very almost godlike, and I think that a spiritual quest. This is almost like a quest for the Grail of sorts, and I think relevance or theme wise shows that a well told story, or like a life legacy that's turned into somebody else's life legacy, and life imitating art and all that is wrapped up into like one package, I think.
Yeah, regarding the power dynamics, especially in regards to money, there was something that a friend of mine, Dave Trumbore, was tweeting about today, where one problem that the movie does have in relation to the book is that the first task in the book took place on the same planet that Wade attended school. People attend school in the Oasis in the book. And so Wade was poor and didn't have many funds to go out and exploring. And so it was really important that the first task was located on the home planet, the school planet, and that it was accessible to him because he basically just had to walk there. And that was one small issue that the movie did have, is that it didn't have those same money rules. Yeah, that the book did have in some aspects, at least, which I think is a valid point. But just one more thing in regards to playing the game, in its favor, at least, we see at the end the Halliday Research Department at IOI celebrates along with Parzival at the end as he claims the last key in the prize, because as I mentioned earlier, they were all in on this quest together because it was about Halliday and it was about celebrating the creator of this thing that people loved, and they were all with Parzival in that moment. So that was really cool.
Yeah, it's just very ironic that the people that work for the evil corporation are celebrating just the victory. It's just a fun thing to watch.
Yeah, because for them it's almost value neutral, right? Like, they're in it for getting to know the man and getting to finding the answer. It's kind of like this was their best shot to prove themselves, but it's almost like it is a group support atmosphere sort of thing. Like, I don't know.
And just along those same lines, it's about putting hard work into what you want. All the Gunters did that. All of Halliday's, or the IOI's Halliday research team did that, and the High Five did that. But Sorrento did not. And so there's that contrast there. Do you guys have any takeaways to add?
I did want to mention the character of H. We kind of skipped an opportunity earlier. I really love the character of H. I like that she is, Wade's best friend. Before the reveal, she cautions him, "Hey, people aren't what they appear on the internet," and they eventually, I don't know that they would have been friends if they knew each other in real life first, because of the gender difference, or it would have, maybe Wade would have seen it as weird or something. But ultimately, that character I thought was really cool, shown to be very competent and with a big heart, and of course is sort of what really brings the High Five together in person in the film is H's connections to the real world, and H has really made something for herself in the Oasis, more so than Parzival or Artemis necessarily had. So being the glue that really brings that group together, I think H should get
and I think that H, her kind of personal conflict was her self-confidence, because I think that's why she kind of disguised herself in this big, massive dude avatar with low voice and
lower
everything.
voice, you know.
So I think her confidence was found through the avatar, and that's how she was able to, when she was revealed to everybody, she's just like, yeah, this is me. I deal with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, own it. Own it, you know, like absolutely like yeah. So definitely wanted to get that said. As far as final thought, I did have one other final thought.
While you're remembering that, I did want to just say I did like the rest of the final five. They didn't have the same like extreme growth that the other characters did. Not to say that any character had extreme growth, but Daito and Sho were fun side characters while they were on screen, and I liked H a lot too. So I just wanted to say that.
Oh, I got it. I just absolutely loved every time in the Oasis when a character would flip through or dial their weapons, like look at their inventory or
so
purchase something. That was so seamless and absolutely so reminiscent of any of the games now where you cycle through inventory. Those special effects in particular, shout out. It's so fluid watching these characters. Because you can watch them scroll through, and they do it pretty quickly. They know what they're looking at, but it's so quick and so smooth, just like a real video game. Like that sold the video game element to me, is just the scroll wheel of them, you know, passing through some options. So big shout out. I know it's not much, but final thoughts, that was impressive. I was really, really happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a movie that I'm really looking forward to owning on Blu-ray because it means I'm going to be able to freeze frame like every single individual shot of the final sequence and find as many references as I can. Last night when I was really hoping to find like a Harry Potter flying around because it's a Warner Brothers film.
Oh,
but unfortunately, I didn't see anything that would hint towards Harry Potter.
Were there
but
any
I did see a Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah. Oh, there was Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, there's a Sonic the Hedgehog during the final fight. We don't see him as a character. We see the spinning blue ball.
Oh, my God, no.
Yeah.
You're kidding.
Yeah, no, not at all. It was a very brief thing, but I did see it the second viewing last night.
Oh my
God. There's actually a video on YouTube that I watched yesterday that kind of shows some of the references. And like the video showed 138, and they're like, yeah, that's barely scratching the surface. That's like the tip of the iceberg.
I got to say, please share that link. That'll be amazing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes, and I'll text it your way here in a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, the other takeaways, just closing off, I already mentioned, we already talked about extensively, was taking care of those around you rather than focusing only on yourself, and finding balance in your life between online personality and real life relationships. That they can coexist. They can both be beneficial. They can both have their negatives, but it's important that they coexist with balance, or you're going to have the future that they have currently. And so hopefully Wade and the high five and Og's idea to close it 2 days a week is going to allow people to spend more time in the real world, to recognize the problems that in that opening monologue he said they'd been ignoring for so long, and make the world a better place. So yeah, it's a sort of pie in the sky kind of ending, but that's okay. It's a fun movie, and I'm already hoping to see it again over the next few days because I've got family in town I want to take to see. And then beyond that, who knows? Maybe another time or two in theaters while I still can. We'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely a movie that you need to enjoy in a theater. Especially, I think IMAX 3D, just like we've all seen, is a good experience.
Mm-hmm. Any other final thoughts, or is that it?
I think that might be it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I would just encourage everybody to read the book because it is a different experience, whether you like the book or not, just to see the differences in it, because the book is not the happy ending that the movie portrays. There's some differences at the end. There may or may not be a main character in the high five that survives or not.
Whoa!
Don't want to spoil that.
Yeah, in general, I will elaborate real quickly on what I heard about the book and the problem that some of my close friends had with it. It was a very in your face, I think, forcing people to relive one man's like deep nostalgia, like it kind of maybe rubbed them the wrong way about how intricate this nostalgia was, that you had to go into like for instance, even just a few examples you guys have said, like war games, like unique Atari games you got to play. Like maybe it was kind of the gotcha aspect of this is my nostalgia coming through, like maybe almost a commentary against the author for just being so niche or something like that. I'm not sure. I'm going to read the book and figure out more about that. But I think the movie was less about shoving it down your throat, and it was more about finding the human in your idol, which I think is ultimately a much more palatable message than necessarily what the book might have been. I am just guessing here. I actually didn't want to be spoiled, so I didn't ask too many hard questions about the book.
Right.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to rereading it in these next few weeks now that I've seen the film a couple times and we'll be seeing it again. So I'm not having experienced it in a couple of years, I'm looking forward to diving back in.
Yeah.
And with that, that's the end of the official 5th episode of Cinescope Today. Thank you so much for joining us, Eric.
Thank you guys for having me.
Contact for the show, facebook.com/Cinescope Podcast and @CinescopePod on Twitter. Please consider going over to iTunes, rating, reviewing, even subscribing if you are enjoying what you're hearing. Email feedback and ideas to thecinescopepodcast@gmail.com, and you can also use that email if you want to suggest a film that is coming out in theaters soon that you would like us to talk about. Right now, I don't know what's immediately on the horizon, but I'm sure, the theaters are about to explode over the next couple of months, and so there's going to hopefully be a lot coming our way to you in regards of new releases, and then the normal show is returning in the very near future. It's been a sort of unintentional hiatus, but it'll be back very soon, and Eric may or may not be back very, very soon.
We got to talk Last Action Hero if you haven't already.
Oh, okay. We'll see that. That sounds like an interesting choice. I'm excited. Eric, how about you go ahead and tell us where people can find you online?
Sure. Easiest way is my Twitter. It is @Spielerman, SPIELERMAN on Twitter. And you can actually find my Harry Potter podcast over at MuggleCast, MuggleCast. And all the links and other ways of contacting me are all on there.
Yeah, 13 years going strong, right?
That's right. We had 360-something episodes in the bag now, so it's super cool.
Awesome. Seth, what about you? Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter @Seth02. That is Seth, SETH, the letter O, and the number 2.
And the best place, as always, is to find me on Twitter as well. That is Chadadada, CHADADADA. Also, facebook.com/Chad.Hopkins. And my other podcast, An American Workplace, where we talk about NBC's The Office episode by episode. We are very near to wrapping up season 4. We also just started a Patreon page for that podcast and hoping to get a few new subscribers. You can find that podcast where they can be found. Podcasts can be found, and also at workplacepodcast.com. Show notes and contact information for this show can be found at thecinescopepodcast.com. And that is all for this week. Thank you again, Eric. It's been awesome talking to you at length about this movie. I'm glad you reached out to me.
Always. I'm really, really glad. Thanks for having me on, even though I hadn't read the book. I'm slowly hating myself for not having done that. But,
yeah, I'm glad you two were able to meet and talk as well.
Yeah, Seth, dude.
Nice
really nice meeting you. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to Cinescope Today, Episode 5. I'm Chad Hopkins.
I'm Seth O'Neill.
This was Cinescope Today, and we'll be back next time with Episode 6. Have fun and celebrate movies.